Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to Conversations in Pop Culture. I have with me Ryan Cummings from Skeletal Press. I think I said it right,
There you go.
right?
You got it. You got it.
Perfect. And you have done a bunch of books, everything ranging from Rumble Kings to Heavy and to Millennium so far. So, how are you?
I'm doing great, man. I'm very excited to be here. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, I'm excited too because I read Rumble Kings the first issue and Millennium the first issue, and I enjoyed both of those books. But before we get
Thank
into
you.
some of that stuff, a lot of people are hearing about your brand and what you publish under for the first time. So, what is Skeletal Press all about, and what's going on with that, and how did that all come about?
Skeletal Press is really just my banner. It's a way for you to identify everything that I put out. Um, I'm really excited for the projects we put together. When I sit down with an art team and we put together a project, the big thing is, hey, let's put together something that either hasn't been done before or that isn't really relevant right now or isn't visible right now. So something like Heavy, I don't see a lot of those kind of comic books, those cyberpunk revenge thrillers in the comic book world. It's something you may see on Netflix or in the movies, but not really in the comic book world.
And so, to even talk a little bit about that before we get into some of these works, one of the things is that your works tend to deal with other things, as you just mentioned. So, where do you draw inspiration from? Because clearly there's a plethora, and I don't want to say on the edge, but definitely not what's being spoken about. Because Rumble Kings and Millennium and even Heavy, and especially Heavy, because that genre has been out of comics, I would say, for at least 15 years, if not 20 at this point. And we don't see many of
Right.
those, and it's kind of almost a throwback to some degree. So I'm just curious where inspiration comes from.
A lot of the inspiration when I come up with a new story is personal. So it's either something I'm going through or something I've been through, and I draw a lot of inspiration for those situations. And with Heavy, it was it was a situation where how do I do the grieving, the loss kind of story, the revenge thriller story, but throw a spin on it and not just make it another Punisher book or another John Wick inspired book. It's like what's something different. So I chose to put it in the cyberpunk world because I came across Vincenzo's art and I was like, man, Vincenzo Riccardi is insanely talented, but I'd never seen him dip into the cyberpunk world. And I was like, well, let's do something with that. And when Heavy came about, it really turned into it's the cyberpunk world. It's that hyper stylized world, but it didn't really deal with the cyberpunk elements too much. It was more the story elements of the emotion of this man's journey, like his loss, his fight for redemption, his unwavering quest for revenge, and it's I always I always end up tapping into those kind of stories, and this one just all the pieces fell together, and it was just it's probably the best thing I've written so far. Like it's definitely the one I get the most hype about. So I was very excited about it.
And to talk about Heavy, because what it reminds me of is a book called Bang Tango by Joe Kelly and Adrian Sabar, and The Revenge, which is a four mini part series, and it's almost a fusion if the two of them had a child. And I don't know if you're familiar with either one of those graphic novels, but Bang Tango is back in the 90s and deals with sort of a similar story where somebody leaves the mob, but then they have unfinished business and something goes wrong. And Bang Tango deals with a transsexual, is sort of thrown into the mix that breaks the gears, for lack of a better word here. And to be slightly politically incorrect, if people want to take it that way, and then Revenge deals with that quest to go hard, and that's more recent.
Yeah,
And that's kind of
yeah,
what this deals with, because a hit goes wrong, and then, well, we're going down a trail of blood with no exit. There's
yeah,
no exit out from this book. There's only one
yeah.
way it goes, and it flows down, not up.
Yep. Yep, that's exactly what Heavy is. Heavy was designed as a 5 issue miniseries, And it was completely a love letter to Garth Ennis. He's one of my favorite writers. And when we put it together, I was like, okay, it's a dystopian future, right, where there's a heavy yakuza presence, and I wanted to deal with the outsider part of that. So we have Marcus who comes in, and he's a young black man who was taken in by the yakuza and raised to be one of them, and he commits the cardinal sin, of falling for the boss's daughter, and then it all goes south from there. And the more we wrote the story and developed the story, I came to the conclusion that there was going to be no happy ending. It was going to be blood all the way to the end. So it really dealt with, once I started writing it and getting more into it, I'm like, yeah, there's going to be a lot of sci-fi action. There's going to be a lot of spectacle. But at the end of the day, it's Marcus's journey to fit into a world that he can ultimately never fit into. And then of course there was the love loss and the fight back. And he has a friend, Tully, who just keeps trying to keep him grounded and saying maybe this isn't the best path for you, but Marcus isn't having that.
And I don't know how far you are as far as the publishing side of all this goes, and what the trajectory of that is. Because I know that, and I'm taking a leap of faith here, because I don't think all of it's out yet.
No, no. We put together, so issue 1 is completely finished. We are completely done with it. Um, the It's not out yet, and the reason it's not out yet is because the artist Vincenzo feels very passionately about this project. And again, he thinks it's one of the best works that he's created. So we're looking for a bigger publisher to put it out under instead of just going to crowdfunding at this point. I only have 2 crowdfunding campaigns under my belt. So to put it out now would probably do the series a disservice. So my partner, Jason Webb, has been trying to put the book in as many publisher hands as possible. We really want to give it the widest release that we can at this point. So that's kind of where Millennium, Rumble Kings, and my other project, Reina, come in, where we may release those ourselves. A few of them are out to publishers as well, but we may release them as well to try to build up the fan base for the inevitable date where, hey, maybe we can't find a publisher for Heavy, so we might just put it out by ourselves. And by that time, maybe our fan base has grown, a little bit more.
So to talk about that, what is the challenge with that? Because that's a very different path than crowdfunding and going the
Yeah.
Kickstarter or even Patreon or digital episodic type route. So I'm very curious where what you've experienced, because you have both things. I'm going to talk about the crowdfunding side in a little bit. I'm just curious because it's very interesting when I speak to people, especially on the indie side, when they go and want to go more traditional publishing route after
Yeah.
the crowdfunding route. So I'm just curious. I think a lot of people are.
When it comes to publishing, no matter the one thing I've run into is no matter how great your project is, if your pitch isn't correct, or if you say you're not an established enough creator, a lot of people won't even look at you. Um, I pushed heavy for months and months trying to find a publisher on my own, got no hits at all. And it wasn't because of the book, it was just because I didn't know how to write a pitch at the time. So that is a big thing, because a lot of artists put together a project, it's beautiful, but if you don't know how to sell that project to a company, then you're pretty much dead in the water. And that's why I think a lot of people resort to crowdfunding.
And then I just know this because of who I had on yesterday, which was Chuck Pino, and he was talking
Yep.
about this with Image. Before you even sell the book to Image, you're already in debt to them. And that's a big
Yeah.
issue with creator owned companies like Image. And I think Dark Horse, I think to some degree, is creator owned as well on certain
Yep.
projects. And other companies sometimes do that as well. But there's few companies that are definitely that route. And I have a feeling you want to go down that route with this project.
Right.
So what is that like, even just figuring out how to navigate that and dealing with all that stuff? Because that's a whole accounting issue and way more technical business side than actually comic creating side.
Right, and that's the struggle for me and a lot of creators out there is we grow up, we're artists, so we create the project, we're happy, we're passionate about the project, but once you start to try to find publishers or get into the self-publishing route, then you have to become a businessman at the same time, and that's something that no one is prepared for. So a lot of times, even in the crowdfunding area, when yeah, you have a great project, but then you turn into a businessman. Well, if you don't know the business aspects of it, then that's where your project can fail and die right there. So for us, yeah, we would love to end up at Image. That's the dream. You know, but at the level that we're at right now, putting it out ourselves is probably the best bet. But that's a whole nother struggle itself because you have to build your fan base. You have to expand that fan base every single day. And that takes a lot of work. You can't just spam the same Facebook groups over and over again. So you basically have to be a marketing genius at this level to try to get your books out and make any kind of real profit off of them.
And now I want to table that because Heavy is not out yet. There's a lot going on with it from what I've read. It seems fascinating. And I'm not going to push it because COVID-19 and releasing any book during this time is going to be a nightmare, whether it's crowdfunded or not. And even the big guys are having a hard time. DC, Marvel, Image, Dark Horse are all having hard times getting their stuff out there and even getting it printed to some degree. But I do want to talk about the other two projects that I read. And the first one I want to talk about is Rumble Kings. And this is interesting because this is kind of A-team-ish, kind of shoot them up style. Everything is fair game and a lot of gun, a lot of violence. It's a loud bunch of mercenaries. So where did this idea come from? Because it is a fun book to read.
You hit the nail on the head with the A-Team reference. I'm a huge fan of 80s and 90s action movies. And this book has probably been in various stages of development my entire life. I used to be an artist first, and I would sit down and just draw comics all day long. And once I found out that I wasn't going to be good enough to draw my own comics the way I wanted to, I switched to just full-time writing. And so basically, Rumble Kings is if Lord of the Rings was directed by Michael Bay. So if that just completely over the top cheeseball summer popcorn movie is what it is, set in a Lord of the Rings, Star Wars kind of world. Like you said, the A-Team reference is heavy. The four guys get together and go out on crazy adventures. They're heroes to an extent, but they're heroes who get in way over their head every time. They're not the guys who are going to stand in the front line and fight tooth and nail and win victorious every time. They're not the Avengers. They get in over their head and they're like, oh crap, we got to go. They do that quite a bit. So it's just a fun read. A lot of humor, a lot of action, just what I wanted to watch as a teenage kid growing up.
And to jump off of that, because once we get past that A-Team 90s explosive element to it, there's a lot of jokes, there's a lot of inferences in this book to some degree. There is serious issues going on, and there is a much deeper core story here. And one of the things that's going on is a family issue. Because we got Raylan, I think is his name, and his brother Coden. And and you can correct me the names on this, because names are not my forsuit, but clearly there's a family issue going on where pretty much one of these guys on the team has an evil brother who's a lord, and he's kind of hunting them down. And so what is that like? Because that adds a different dynamic to it and definitely adds an interesting spin onto it.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it'll spoil anything, so I'll just put it out there. So these boys are basically orphans who were brought together and raised by this one man who was trying to reform himself. And so Raleigh, the oldest brother, is the leader of the group. And these boys were taken in by this warrior. Well, this warrior had a real son named Croden, and that's the villain from the first issue. And it kind of stems from a more serious real life issue where the father takes more of a shine to the other boy instead of his real son. And so that's where the animosity between those two come together. And that definitely carries on through the book. I wish I would have sent you issue because it really comes to light then. Uh, it's really, they're all orphans, but they are all outcasts who come together to go on this journey, and how they've grown up together and how they interact with each other in this over the top fantasy world.
Yeah, and there's even more stuff going on now because there's
Oh
also
yeah.
a transportation of a kid who is a weapon and something going on with that we don't know too much about in the first issue. And I don't want to ruin too much of what's going on, but
Right.
that's in play as well. And so clearly there's a lot of paths that start in the first issue, and we don't get a lot of answers in it. And but clearly this could go on for a while, and there's a lot of stuff going on. So what was that like? And then also to throw another thing in there, got like some weird dragon insect stuff too, and some fantasy crazed out things, and that's also fascinating, and that adds a level of that fantasy touch into it. So what is it like to really
Yeah.
throw all these ideas and then kind of, the way I put it is, cook a stew with a bunch of different, spices?
So really, my whole thing is it's story driven, it's character driven. Like, so what's the underlying story and issues that I want to get across in this story? Like family is a really big one for the Rumble King series. Um, Fitting in, acceptance, um, destiny, legacy. Those are all big parts of this series. But when it comes to the fantasy world, um, honestly, my biggest thing is how can I pop the artist? Like, what's going to make the artist go, holy crap, I can't wait to draw that. So with issue two, at the end of issue one and the beginning of issue two, where you see those dragons and those big creatures, it's like, man, what if a giant tornado came ripping through town, but it was a sandstorm filled with lightning breathing dragons? I explained that to my artist, and he flipped his lid for it. So I'm like, sweet, there we go. We're off. We got our villains for issue two. You know, and issue three, it's the same exact thing. You know, and a lot of times with my books, that's what I really want to do. I want to give my artists something they haven't done before, but more importantly, I want to give the fans something they haven't seen, either in comics at all or in comics in a long time.
And to talk about that, because issue one ends sort of with this team retreating and then saying we got to get the hell out of there and being pursued. A lot of stuff happened, and then we know that they're going to be somewhat pursued, and they're going to be pursued into, I guess, an area that is not resourceful, is a good way to put it. And what can people expect? Because I think issue two is out there, or it's going to be out there
Uh,
soon.
yeah, yeah. It's out there. It's being fulfilled. It was a Kickstarter campaign, and it's being fulfilled right now. Actually, we're waiting for the prints, the exclusive prints we had, but all the packages are getting packed up and getting sent out now.
So, what can people expect with issue two without giving away too much and where things are going?
Oh man. So just issue two is basically a car chase. I'll put it that way. It's an over the top Michael Bay inspired car chase through this, you know, Lord of the Rings inspired fantasy world. Something that I haven't seen in comics personally. Um, it looks really good, and it'll set us up for issue three, which is the finale of the first arc. And so issue two has a pretty big cliffhanger on it as well.
And just to give an idea, because I'm curious, so is issue three going to be kickstarted as well?
It's looking that way too. Yeah. My other books that we were putting out, we're doing it a different way. So with Rumble Kings, we completed about 30 to 50% of each book, and then we put it out to Kickstarter to crowdfund it. We had a little bit of trouble with issue two. It took oh man, about a good 9 months to get the issue done, maybe 10 months. We had a lot of production issues, so I made the decision going forward that from now on, with every new issue or with every new book we put out, it's going to be completely done or at least 90% done before it goes to crowdfunding. So, like with Millennium, my dark fantasy series, Reina, and with Heavy, those issues are done. And we're going to put them out to publishers, reach out and see what publishers think of them first. And then if we get no feedback from them or we get no bites, then we're going to take it to crowdfunding as a complete book. That way, as soon as the campaign ends, boom, your books are going out to you.
So to talk about that, because Kickstarter has changed, and I'm not an expert on Kickstarter, I've just actually gotten sort of into Kickstarter. And one of the things that I've noticed in the last 6 months on Kickstarter is that a lot of comic creators, writers, artists are now getting 90% or 100% of the book done. And all they're trying to do is just get the money to get it printed. So they have it
Yeah.
digitally done, and they're almost using it as a pre-order form for anybody who wants that book, and then to print some extras to bring to a con and some other
Yep.
things that, or the other side that they're doing is that they've already funded the entire thing, and then the Kickstarter pays them back, and they're almost borrowing
Yeah.
from themselves. And that's a
Yep.
new thing, because 5 years ago, and I'll grant that the comic world and the indie comic world was much smaller at that point, that didn't really exist. So I'm curious what
Right.
your thoughts are on about that and that shift, because it's clearly a shift, and it's probably where we're going in the future with Kickstarter, especially on the indie comic scene, it seems.
Definitely. And especially as more mainstream guys or larger guys who work for bigger publishers come into the crowdfunding scene. You're seeing that a lot. Like I just backed Duncan Jones's new book. He's a very successful filmmaker, and he has his Moon series, and I guess he's finishing out that film series as a graphic novel. And I'm like, this guy's got all the money in the world. He doesn't need to go to crowdfunding. But it's what crowdfunding does is it's a direct link between the creator and the fan or the supporter. So there's no middleman. There's no need for a comic book company. There's no need for really anybody except for you and the fans. That's my favorite part of crowdfunding because I'm very big. I'm a very big supporter of creator rights. You create it, you own it. Bottom line. So if I'm able to just give you the book instead of giving it to a publisher who's going to take at least 50% of what I've got, I would much rather just give it straight to you. Um, so with crowdfunding, like Rumble Kings #1 was my very first attempt at crowdfunding. My very first Kickstarter, I had no idea what I was doing. I reached out to a couple of, I think I'd only backed a few projects before then, but I'd reached out to a couple of creators that I liked, asked for advice. Dave Cook, the writer and creator of the cyberpunk book Killtopia, actually put out a step-by-step instruction guide online for how to run a successful Kickstarter. And I've made no bones about it, saying that I can just completely ripped off his complete strategy for that book. It wasn't as successful as his, obviously, but it really helped me out a lot. But I went into that book with 9 pages complete, and we went, I want to say we raised 3,000 something for the book, which doesn't seem like a lot, but when you have no money going in, it's a lot. Issue 2, we went in with only a couple of pages finished, which was a big mistake in hindsight. So the more I think about it, if you're able to do a complete project, get all the artwork done, get everything done, and just go to Kickstarter for printing, that's by far the best route. But there's levels to it. Like I said, when I came in, I didn't have the resources to do that. And now I'm at a point where, hey, look at me. I can pull some money out of my bank account because of my previous Kickstarters and get this thing going.
And we're going to table Rumble Kings right there. I'm going to talk about Kickstarter in a minute or two. Or in a few minutes, I should say, because I do want to talk about Millennium. And that book is more my style. I'm a big Super Folks fan, which led to Astro City, which then led to Tiger and Bunny, which then led to My Hero Academia. Most people actually don't know where My Hero Academia actually started. That's the entire lineage right there, and this is sort of in that sector. And so the basic premise is that a Nazi separatist group in an alternative World War II storyline basically unleashes Kane, or a Kane like monster figure, from this
There you go.
tomb that it was encapsulated in by the Guardian, which is a superhero who's now a successful businessman. And then, I guess, a few years after World War II, and that was neutralized, he's released. Kane is out there, and then they're now building a team to deal with this. And that's kind of where we're at with this. And it's very interesting what's going on. And we kind of get a story that's sort of linear to some degree.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so the entire idea for Millennium came about. How do I say this? I'm a huge pulp era kind of guy, like Doc Savage, the Lone Ranger, Zorro, those kind of guys. I'm a huge Tom Strong fan. Huge Tom Strong fan. Um, with the exception of Swamp Thing, it's probably my favorite thing Alan Moore's ever done. So I'm a big Tom Strong fan. Um, but really, it comes from I'm a huge Lee Falk fan, and I love The Phantom. If anybody's ever seen that movie or read those books, and I've always wanted to write that series. I love that world, that Prohibition era, early America world. And I was like, man, I just want to. It was kind of. It started out as like maybe fan fiction, probably more of a love letter to those style of books. Like, man, what if we just teamed up like the Lone Ranger and the Shadow and Doc Savage and the Phantom? And the more I thought about it, I was like, man, I'm not going to wait to get to a point where I can write those books. I'm just going to create my own book in that setting. And that's what I did. And I think Nazis are some of the best villains you can put in fiction. Like, they're just scum of the earth, and everybody likes to see them get beat. So I'm like, let's roll with that for now. Obviously, it evolves and it becomes much, much bigger. Issue 1 is basically just the introduction to everybody. And with Irwin does such an amazing job with the art. Like, I cannot put into words how amazing his artwork is. It's almost photorealistic. It's not your typical pulp adventure style. But everybody I've sent the book to, all the reviews I've gotten on it so far, say that we've nailed that feeling. So hopefully, people check it out and people dig it. It is a black and white book, but Irwin's art just is so amazing. You get lost in it. You don't even care that it's black and white.
And let's talk about that, because black and white could be a gift or it could be a curse in the comic, right?
Yeah.
Good black and white.
Yeah.
Good black and white is amazing. And I forgot what book it is. And it's a Marvel book. And it's slipping my mind. But you read it in color and you read it in black and white, and it's two different stories completely.
Yeah.
And the black and white version is like the holy grail of what comics should be.
Yeah.
The book's slipping my mind. And if somebody has that book, please, if you know what book I'm talking about, I think it's like an X-Men book. I forget which one it is, but it might even be like Jim Lee's run on something. I don't know, but it's the idea that it's these like 6 or 7 issues that are just pure gold in black and white, and they were done in color too. But it's this idea that, well, when I say it's a gift or a curse, because bad black and white is bad, and you notice everything, and good black and white is great. So was this intentional to put it in black and white, or was this just sort of a happy accident when you were writing it, and production costs, because black and white can be cheaper in a lot of ways?
Well, really what happened was, it was from day one, we knew we wanted to do a black and white. And Irwin's art is kind of like a penciled painting, sort of. So the black and white does not take away from the issue at all. It's a gorgeous book. A lot of, like you said, a lot of black and white comics suffer from the fact that the artists a lot of times don't know how to execute black and white. I see a lot of black and white books on crowdfunding that are just line art, and that's kind of a cheat to me. Like, you've got to have your tones or your gray washes to make it a true black and white book. But that being said, I'm a huge Judge Dredd fan, and I've been reading that for years. And the first couple years of Judge Dredd were all just black and white line art. So I guess it kind of depends on the story and how you present it. But with Irwin, you're gonna watch it. You're gonna look at this book and you're gonna read it, and you're not gonna say, "Hey, this is black and white." You know, you're gonna say, "This is a beautiful book." You know, but as far as the creative process, we basically were like, it's a pulp book. It's a throwback to Prohibition era. It the book takes place in an alternate America, so Prohibition is stretched far through World War II. So the more we thought about it, we're like, yeah, we're watching this on a black and white TV as kids. You know, that's kind of where the stylistic approach came from.
And there is some science fiction thrown in there, so it's not completely like that 1940s, 1950s, 1960s
Right.
America. You know, we got some robots, we got a talking gorilla, we got some
Yep.
superhero stuff in there, we got some cool inventions and some other stuff going on. And clearly, and I'm taking a leap of faith here, but sort of get away from the Nazis, but they still lost the war. You know, so
Yeah.
it's not like the man in the high castle or anything like that.
Right. Right.
So we're just dealing with a variety of facts that happened in the America we live. Assume we're not in a simulation, which is a theory
Right.
that there's a different discussion completely.
Right.
But kidding aside here, one of the things is that what is that like to introduce those elements in there, because we do have technology in there that doesn't exactly exist in 2020 in this book.
Right. And you're gonna see that in issue two. It goes well beyond that. A funny fact: when I put this project together, it was a completely different project. It was a down to earth, 100% serious, gritty, no superpowers superhero book, basically like a crime book. And I had the first two issues written, and the more we dove into it, I passed it around to a couple people, and they're like, "Oh, this is cool. It's not my cup of tea." So I talked to Irwin, and I'm like, "Hey, man, what do you want to draw?" I'm like, "I have this serious crime, thriller book over here, but what do you want to draw?" And he basically just said, "I want to draw the craziest stuff I can draw." And I'm like, "Let's do that." So over the course of the next week, I just ended up retooling that entire book, and we turned it into this giant pulp era book with all these different things. So you've got Nazis, you've got monsters, you've got supernatural things, you've got, like you said, the robots. I don't want to spoil issue two, but you've got some crazy things getting set up in issue two. Who you think Kane is from his few appearances in issue one, it's completely turned on its head when you get to issue two. It's it's
Yeah,
basically just the most over the top things that we could do,
and
and it's just fun.
just to give everybody a little bit of information, and I don't think this spoils anything. Kane, as soon as Kane awakens, Kane goes on a rampage, and that's why this team needs to be assembled, and it's a high priority. And there's a lot of
Yeah,
decisions being made because this is a real threat, and it does have that type of pacing where, you know, I think Kane kills like 150 people within like 3 panels or 3 pages, which raises
yeah,
the stakes to some degree. So this is a real situation that needs to be addressed. And so it's also fascinating that in this book we get the return of a veteran hero with a team of relatively new heroes,
yeah.
and we get that sort of mentorship and wisdom versus I don't want to say not wisdom, but inexperience might be the better word to
That's
use.
that's perfect. That's perfect. All of the other heroes in the book have been active less than a year. So as cool as they are, when you see them, like, oh my goodness, look at this guy. They've been active less than a year. And in our world, in the world of Millennium, the Guardian was the only superhero at this time. There was nobody else, so there's never been a super team before. And when the main character, Matthias Graham, comes up with the idea, hey, let's put together a team of these special people who've been popping up, the government laughs him out of the building. And that's where we pick up issue one, where Graham has left his job with the government and goes to seek out, his old acquaintance, the Guardian.
And that leads itself to a whole variety of issues and things that can happen. And I don't know how long you're planning to write this, but going well beyond. I mean, I could think of 10 ideas off the top of my head to raise the stakes of this book at any given time.
Yeah.
You know,
Oh
and I
yeah.
think a lot of people
Um,
can as well.
I'm a huge fan of Astro City. If anybody's read that or just dove into that book, and I love that fact of these all these superheroes existing together in one world. So I'd be lying if I said that wasn't an influence on this book. So right now, Millennium is scheduled for 4 issues. The issue 4 may be a double-sized issue. We're still trying to work out the logistics of that. Depends on where we land with it. But yeah, there's definitely so much more. I have through maybe issue 16 plotted out. So this could definitely keep going for a while.
And to talk a little bit about that, and you kind of answered it, but how far do you have this planned out? And is it you want to go the publisher route, or is it always going to be on Kickstarter, or still exploring options? Because you have issue 2 kind of in the bag, and you sort of said you have issue 4 at this point. But what route do you think that you're going to be going with this book?
The Speaking with Irwin, the dream is to do this monthly somewhere. If we could do it monthly, that's the dream because I write very quickly and he produces the art very quickly, and we're the team, with the exception of Justin Birch who letters and Casey Pierce who does the editing. Like we're a small team. It's a relatively cheap book to put out, and we are fast. So if we could do a monthly book, man, I could easily turn that 16 issue plot that I have into 60. Like I'm so passionate about this book, or keep knocking these things out for a while.
And we're going to table this book, and we're going to talk about the final one, which is, I think, the Dark Queen book, which the name is slipping
Oh,
me.
Raina, yeah.
And I don't know as much about this book as the others. So you're gonna have to educate me a little bit on this book, but clearly there's something going on with this book, and this one's sort of a newer one.
Yeah, this is the newest. Well, hold on. This is the newest one that I have put out so far. I have a couple other issues that are either in early stages of development or I can't say anything about because there are other creators involved. But Reina is my to Conan the Barbarian, but with a twist on it. I'd wanted to do a strong female book. I have a 14-year-old daughter at home, and I wanted her to have something that she could look at and be like, man, that's cool. I can identify with that guy. She's not big into superheroes punching aliens or, you know, guys chasing monsters across the post apocalyptic desert. But something with a strong female lead, is something she could really grip into. This book, obviously, she has to wait till she's 18 for. It's very much an adult book. Um, it's really my take of on the Conan the Barbarian trope, but with a girl with a dragon tattoo type of twist. It's about a girl who, when she was younger, she fell in with this band of, we'll call them mercenaries at this point, and she grew up the only female in the band. And when issue 1 opens up, she's struggling to find her place in the world. She's different than everybody else she's ever met, and she's really just trying to find her identity. And of course, along the way, they fight giant fantasy monsters.
Sounds like barmaids from Zenoscope to some degree. But
Without all the gratuitous nudity, yeah.
but having said that, and the reason why I bring this up is that clearly you've written a variety and you have a range of what audience you've written for, and going from gratuitous nudity and adult to maybe PG-13. Rumble Kings is really not. Your average 13-year-old can read that book, and there's no
Yeah,
eyebrows are going to be raised. Probably a 9-year-old could read it too in reality, and it wouldn't be
that's
maybe.
pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah. Rumble Kings is pretty much my Marvel movie, my big summer book. Anybody can read that and love it. Heavy's the R-rated book that really nobody should read. unless you're, older now. Reina, same thing. It's definitely an 18 plus book. I wanted to make a heroine that wasn't just cheesecake or TNA. I wanted a serious character. Um, the Girl with the Dragon Tattoo is one of my favorite books of all time. I've read it several times already. And I was like, man, I want to do a twist on that character, but I want to do it in a genre that character hasn't been done before. And I'm a huge Conan fan. I'm a huge Solomon Kane fan. I'm like, let me just see what I can do in that realm. And the more I developed it, the more that genre made sense. And again, there's not, with the exception of Red Sonja, maybe, there's not strong female barbarian women out there. So that genre just made sense for me.
And we're going to table it there because I don't want to get too deep into the gratuitous nudity. But if you saw my latest interview last night, we pretty much sunk the ship. And there's no way I'm ever going to
Yeah.
get monetized on Facebook again. So everything's free game.
Well,
So
let me clarify that first. That there's not any of that in Reina. That's definitely a Zenoscope thing. But with Reina, you may see some things in there, but it's not. Yeah, it's not gratuitous at all.
anyway, I'm still never going to get monetized after my interview last night. So it doesn't really matter if it is or it isn't. So anyhow,
Right? Yeah, yeah.
kidding
That's true.
aside, I do want to shift gears. And I want to talk about something that is related to all this stuff. And COVID-19 has done a lot of damage to the comic world. And it's
Yeah.
done a lot of damage, and I'm a strong believer that we don't know half the damage that's been done up to this point. And New York just had under 100 deaths reported, and they're declining. I'm in DC, which is supposed to be peaking this week, and then pretty much right after Memorial Day, it's going to start peaking. And we're expected
Yeah.
to get 20,000 new cases reported and a variety of other stuff. I was interviewing somebody on Friday who said they live in Missouri and that's not going to start peaking till July. And clearly, we have a lot of stuff going on in the comic world where cons are shut down, DC is sort of shut down. Very few new books are being printed. I think Image released 2 or 3 books last week at the most. And then also San Diego Comic Con is being canceled. But Tampa in Florida said July 17th, we're good to go, which is a
Oh,
very interesting situation. So I'm very curious your take on the industry as a whole right now and where it sits, and in particular the con scene, because that's a very bizarre position, and it's confusing both on a creator side, and I know it's a long-winded question, as well as a fan side.
um. Well, luckily for you, I have a long-winded answer. So again, like I said earlier, I'm big on creator rights and creator freedom. So for me, I think the perfect place for comic book creators is a platform like Kickstarter. Um, Not necessarily for your crowdfunding, but for your like the pre-order. I get it from me to you, no middleman, no comic company. Marvel and DC and Image, those bigger companies, they're hurting because they have large companies, they have large infrastructures. They've got to get it through so many channels to get it into your hands or into my hands. Whereas with something like Kickstarter, you buy directly from me, I ship directly to you. So I think that's why you haven't seen Kickstarter take as big a hit as you've seen Marvel and DC take. Because I've been watching. We're getting ready to launch Rumble Kings issue 3 on Kickstarter as soon as Rumble Kings 2 is fulfilled. And I was nervous. I'm like, well, as a lot of creators are, COVID hit and it's shutting things down. People are out of work, people are out of jobs. Thankfully, I'm an essential employee, so I'm still working, so I'm still able to do this. But a lot of people are nervous about releasing content in this climate. But if you look at the numbers, man, um, crowdfunding is still going big, still going strong. And I think that's going to be the wave of the future. Eventually it's going to just become a lot of these artists where the older route was you work your way up to Marvel or DC and then move into Image or Dark Horse, like when the creator owned, I think you're going to see a lot more of those guys move into the crowdfunding space because their money is there. Maybe not as much, but their money is there. They bring their established fan bases over, and then boom, directly to you. You know, you cut out a lot of the middleman that way.
And I think that that's the business side, but I'm very curious about how you feel about all this con stuff that's going on because
Oh, yeah, yeah.
just to give people some background for those who don't know and are watching, a lot of indie people go to cons. A lot of big establishment goes to cons as well, and there's a mixture. And some cons are more friendly to indie than not. I don't know if you know Thomas Johnson II. He does the Raxon
Uh,
universe.
yeah, I'm not familiar.
He's I think in Michigan, and I think I'm almost like certain, and he was talking about how some cons are friendlier versus others, but the question really is that some San Diego's done, and they're saying we're not touching this, and that's a big issue because I don't know what the indie scene is on in San Diego or New York Comic Con because those are big, massive cons. But I know that a lot of small cons have big indie presence, and a bunch of cons are saying no, thank you, and we're not opening or we're canceling or we're postponing. But Tampa said we're going right ahead on
Yeah.
July 17th, and so I'm just curious how you feel about all this and what you think on as a creator because I don't know how many cons you go to, but then also what you think of from a fan's perspective because I'm assuming you're in sort of both genres.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I I go to a con. I leave my table several times to go check out other people's stuff. Hey, look at that cool stuff over there. I'm a fan. That's why I got into this. Michigan is really good about embracing the indie community. Um, all the comic shops I've talked to who have a con presence, they've embraced me and Rumble Kings, and they're excited for what we have next. Um, just the con scene up here is great for indies. I know so many people who are very successful selling their books at cons in Michigan who might not have a big online presence or, you know, they're not selling books through Dark Horse or Image or anything. Um, it definitely sucks from a fan standpoint that I can't go hang out with my con friends. You know, when the show's done, there's no getting drinks and hanging out and getting Chinese food afterwards. And not being able to meet the fans is the big one for me because that's where I thrive. I'm introducing new people to the world and the new issues, and that's what I miss. So hopefully we get everything back on track to where we can safely open up conventions again and get that experience back.
And given that things are sort of not safe, I mean, Michigan is right now very much a hot spot for COVID
Oh yeah,
19. And it's one of, I don't want to say the worst, but it's problematic, and there's a lot of cases there. And so I
yeah,
imagine that a bunch of cons have been canceled. Just
yeah,
for safety reasons, it's probably the right call. I had an anime con on my show earlier, maybe a month and a half ago, and they canceled outright because of something called con crud, where somebody
yep.
has the flu, everybody gets it at a con, and this is probably way more infectious than that. And so I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on when you think cons are going to come back online and even what they're going to do going forward because there is an issue. I'm a fan. I do panels at cons as well, and but I'm first and foremost a fan, and I'm not comfortable so gun ho on going back to a con for probably the next 6 months to 8 months, even if this thing is there's no second wave or anything like that. So I'm just curious
Yeah.
what you feel about that because everybody has a different opinion on it.
I completely agree with you. I'm con crud is real. Don't let anybody tell you it's not. No matter how you prepare for it, you're going to get the con crud. So I can only imagine what something like COVID would do in that situation. Um, I think we've all been at the table when somebody comes up flipping through the pages, just hacking all over everything. So imagine if that was COVID. So we really need to, as a community, an indie community, and a comic community at large, we need to be smart about how we roll out opening up and conventions and things. I'm definitely, I shut down for 2020. So there, even if more cons pop up, I'm not rolling out for 2020. We'll see what happens next year. But much love and thoughts and prayers for everybody who's going to make the trek to Tampa and get tables and be the guinea pigs, so to speak.
Hey, you know what it is? It's Florida, and if you're down there and you want to take the risk, it's up to you. But
Yeah,
the way I view it is that I view it, and I'm just curious your reaction to what I'm going to say is. So when I do a panel, I don't get paid, and I like to present, but I want as many people in that room as possible because it's a
yeah,
nice feather in my cap. So I've done a panel where I had one person in the room and it fucking sucked,
yeah,
and the con felt bad when they were like checking in on me. Like, hey man, I'm really sorry about that. I'm like, it's not your fault, but it's
yeah,
not a good feeling, and I get a free badge, and it's not like I'm not losing money per se, in the sense that I bought a table, but if you are an indie creator and your table ran you $500 on the more expensive side or more, and then what happens is that there's only like 1,000 people at a con that normally gets 5,000. I would imagine that there's less traffic, and so because
yeah,
people don't feel comfortable, and that's not a good feeling either because as it sits right now, a lot of artists for a while weren't even breaking even at cons because of cosplay,
yeah,
and I like cosplay, and I like these celebrities, and I'm not trying to beat them up, and a bunch of them have been on my podcast and my main podcast, but there is an issue that the pie has been cut up a lot more than it
yeah,
used to be, and now if you take out a 50% of the fans or 60% of the fans, that's even less, and so I think that's a big concern that just it's probably below safety, but it's definitely an issue, and I think it's a
yeah,
real concern because and everybody has a different business model, but who I speak to, and this might be a generalization, but people do really well at cons because
yeah,
there's a bunch of indie comic stuff there, and I might pick up like 6 or 7 issues that I normally wouldn't pick up at a con from indie creators, especially if you upsell it to me. And like I'm a big mecha fan, and so if somebody has like a
yeah,
mecha comic, I'm like, oh, what's this? And I'll pick up a first issue, and then I'll say, oh, what's this? And I'm talking to you, so that's a massive concern. I'm wondering how you feel about that because that's a big business concern. Not to mention that when we come out of this, and I don't want to say we're in a depression, but the entire economy has been suppressed, and people jobs aren't coming back so quickly. Not to mention that if you worked in a restaurant, you know,
yeah,
8 months later, who's sitting in a restaurant so quickly?
yeah.
So I'm,
Well, and
yeah, please.
the thing uh, to just to add on to that, like I said, I'm an essential employee. My job isn't going anywhere. But I know a lot of people who go to cons, they work those kind of jobs. Like they may work fast food jobs or they may work, grocery store jobs, something like that. They're not all, college educated,
And they save up
$100,000
their
jobs a
money.
year.
They save up their money,
Ex- yep.
and you see somebody, and I'm just going to tell a quick story. There are people who save up their money and save up and don't take vacations and live in I don't want to say live in a shabby apartment, don't have nice clothes, don't have nice
Yep.
things, and they will spend 2 grand, and that's their
Yeah.
holiday. And I've seen
Yep.
it in which that, and there's nothing wrong with that, but they might be making on the high end. I know people who make $50,000 and they will spend 3 grand at a con, but they save up
Yeah.
that money the entire time. And when this hits and everything's suppressed, now they might only be down to $1,500, which is still a lot of money. And I'm not
Oh yeah.
disparaging that, but that changes the entire game plan.
Yeah, it does. Well, and especially if you're coming from out of town. I mean, you've got travel, you've got a hotel, you got food, you got all this stuff you got to factor in before the money you plan to just go and blow on your favorite stuff at a con. And I know quite a few people who like they live for the conventions. You might only go to one or two conventions a year, but that's your thing for the year. So if your money is getting, cut in half, or like for some people, it's not even there, you're going to be hurting, and a lot of those people, when we open back up, a lot of those people have lost their jobs. So you're only going to have like maybe the people who can really afford to go see the celebrities, or buy the expensive,
It tears down.
props
It
and
tears
stages and
down.
stuff.
That's what
Yeah,
happened.
yeah, yeah,
And I hate to say it this way, and this is why partially I'm doing this, is because unfortunately, people like me and my podcast, and I have a T-shirt out there. I'm the last dog at the teat, for lack of a better word.
yeah, yeah,
I'm the run of the litter, and I hate to say it, but indie comics in many ways are sort of the last dog. I mean, you guys are probably a step above me to some degree, but it's that where and that's a massive problem, and I think it's going to be a real problem for cons. And that's not to say that indie comics, because I think indie comics have doubled in the last 5 years, and I think that's a conservative estimate, and have grown by that point in the last 5 years due to Kickstarter and other things. But even still, at a con, it's kind of the last thing, and so from a business standpoint, that's a big concern from a lot of people, and I recognize it. And I'm not even producing an indie comic yet.
yeah. And the big thing too to remember is a lot of people who get into this, like say yourself or like myself, when we go to a con, we spend a lot of money just to have a presence there. So a lot of times you might not even break even, you might not even see a profit at all. So a lot of people are just going out there to get their name out there, to build up their audience, and B, just for the love of doing it. I don't know how many times I went to a convention, we're walking through Artist Alley, and I would tell my fiance, I'm like, I should be on the other side of that table. That's where I need to be. And you know, that's hey, I'm on the other side of that, and now where are the people coming through? You can't just rush those people in without a sense of safety, you know, before we're ready to, I guess, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, and I'll even attest to that. As a panelist, I get a free badge, and
Yeah,
I don't break even with a free badge, because
yeah,
and I stay local. I stay local in DC, and I don't even break even, because going to
yeah,
do an Uber back and forth, or taking the metro costs money. You got to
yeah,
eat. It's my time. I typically take a day off, and so I actually lose money by presenting and doing a panel. Not to mention the amount of hours that it actually takes. So
yeah,
I completely understand, and I'm just trying to build a name. And the craziest thing is that for a $15 Facebook ad, I could get more press from a
yeah.
$15 Facebook ad than I can at a con, which is ludicrous. Um,
But the experience of being at the con is a whole thing separate to itself.
it's a lot of fun, and I take advantage of it, and I wouldn't take it away, but it's definitely something that's out there, and I think it needs to be spoken about, because this isn't spoken about, and people don't like speaking about this, and cons don't like hearing it either, which is a whole different discussion indefinitely. But having said all this, and kind of talking about sort of the promotion side, I do want to give you an opportunity to promote what's coming out, where people can find it, buy it, follow it on social media, look out for those Kickstarters that are coming.
You can find everything about me and my books at skeletalpress.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram at Skeletal Press. Um, Rumble Kings 1 is available to purchase right now. Rumble Kings 2 is being fulfilled through Kickstarter right now. As soon as the backers are all funded, or all the backer rewards are all sent out, it'll be available to buy on our website. And then with Reina and Heavy and Millennium, as of now, they're out to publishers. So one way or another, those will all be available very soon. So
And
if
I'm
you
going to
want to
ask,
keep track, if anybody wants to follow along for the ride, skeletalpress.com. Come check us out.
And I'm going to ask a question because I think it's relevant. Do you have physical copies and digital copies, or just the physical right now?
Oh, we have physical and digital. So if you decide, hey, I want to check out the digital, everybody who buys a physical gets a digital, regardless. That way, I can say, hey, I'll send you that digital, and you read that while you wait for your physical to get there. And if you buy it through our web store, hey, you might even get a couple extra goodies in your package.
Perfect. And I'm just going to say this out there right now, everybody, because I've been saying it over and over again, and people might be getting sick of me when I say this, but support now is not just economic support, you know, because right now we're in tough times, and if you are taking care of your family and just trying to survive the wave, that's what you got to do, and that's perfectly fine. Nobody's going to disparage you for that. But if you have electricity and internet and you think this stuff is cool and you're interested, one of the best things that you can do is definitely check out his website. Check out Skeletor Press' website and support it there. Follow along, favorite it, as well as check out all their social media. And I'm sure they have the links up on their social media on your website, right?
Yep,
And
yep.
and the reason why I say this is because in many ways a comment or a page like on Facebook or a comment on Facebook is just as valuable. Sharing it, posting it on your Facebook wall. It's so useful. It is effective. Tweeting
Yep.
out about it. If you tweet about it once every month, you might find that you got 100 friends on Twitter. That's 100 people that now can potentially see it. And it also helps to change the algorithm. So unless
Yep.
you don't have electricity or internet, there's no excuse now for not supporting, because support is
Right.
not just money. And if you think it is, you got to redefine your definitions of support. And I think we're going to wrap it up
And for
there.
the algorithm thing, oh, hey, let's do that.
Oh, please tell us about algorithms. I love
Oh no, I
algorithms.
was just gonna say real quick, if you have artist friends or you have artists that you like, don't just like their things. Use the heart react, because when you love somebody's picture or post, that's how the algorithm sees it. They don't see the like button at all. So comment on it, heart react, share. That's how you're gonna support your artist the most.
And retweeting on Twitter also really helps.
Definitely, definitely.
And I think we're going to wrap it up there. So thank you for being on, because this happened sort of accidentally, because I completely forgot that we were going to do this. And then I found out last night. I'm like, oh, let's do it. So that's what happens
Yep.
sometimes. For everybody who kind of thought that this one came out of the woodwork, it sort of did. But that's what happens on my live stuff. Is that this is my seventh from Tuesday to now. 7 of them have been done.
Oh
So
wow.
thank you so much for being on. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on, man. I'll come back anytime.